the initiative that President Obama led to save General Motors and Chrysler and save 200,000 Michigan jobs. And you all remember because you were here and they were, looking to write us off the map in Michigan. People were saying, oh my gosh, who's going to turn off the lights in Detroit? And yet we rebounded. And today we are responsible for incredible proliferating technologies and automotive jobs, leading the way on electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles. And we've had a setback from this virus. We've got to beat this virus. We've got to prioritize public health and science and get people back to work, get them back to work safely, get our kids back to school and get them back to school safely as well. So that's a big priority of mine going into this election and what I'm campaigning on, and also what I want to work on in Congress. And I remain very optimistic about this region's future and our ability to continue to lead the way, because all you have to do is look around you and get inspired by what people are doing, how our small businesses have been innovative and resourceful, and what we can do to help continue to get people back on track here. So thank you.
Well, you talked about economics and how you was part of the Obama administration around that. So this is a good lead into our first question. Do you oppose rolling back the current administration tax cuts? And if so, how will we reduce the national debt and still provide needed government service? And then also, this one last point, most people think these tax cuts are permanent, and they're only really permanent for corporations. And most people don't realize that the tax cuts are going to go back up anyway. But I would like you to, could you answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 ballooned our deficit by 1.5 trillion over the next 10 years. We've seen it go towards the wealthiest corporations and the 1% of the 1% of hardworking Americans. We've seen kind of a mixed bag for the rest of Americans, hardworking Americans. I have directly heard from constituents who have told me to my face, I'm not better off, and we need tax fairness. And I don't think this has served our economy well. And it's frankly been quite astonishing that those who were in such a big rush to pass that tax bill of 2017 are the same people standing in the way of our recovery efforts for the economy as we look to tackle coronavirus. And so what I want to see us do is this. I was with President Obama when he talked about lowering the corporate tax rate. I think we recognized we just didn't have a level playing field. We saw businesses get to a certain size and say, oh, we're going to reallocate where we're headquartered to get a better corporate tax rate. And what we ended up doing, and even industry partners will tell you this, Ramon, I mean, we just went too low. And we're seeing this on housing measures and the way buildings get built based on the tax code, that's thrown that system out of whack. We see the tax credits for hardworking Americans who are looking for a little relief with daycare, which is an exorbitant cost and is now flipped on its head in this pandemic. I want to support small businesses with the resources to continue to recruit talent into their place of work and get them incentives to attract people for daycare resources and on and on and on. And I'll just also say, I think we can do a lot more for our middle class. And this is something that I want to see on some of the tax reforms going forward. We don't want to jeopardize Medicare and Social Security. This has been absolutely jeopardized with this tax plan. And I think that's important. These are earned benefits. We've got a plan to make Social Security solvent, as well as make sure that our hardworking families and retirees have their fair share in terms of what we're doing with our tax structure. I know you also mentioned our debt and our deficit. This is something I take incredibly seriously as a lawmaker. Any bill that I'm signing on to, I'm looking at that return on spend. It's taxpayer spend. We see this with education. This is something that will always pay dividends back into our treasury. If you educate your population and equip them with the skills and the abilities to flourish as adults in careers. And it doesn't mean everyone's got to go to a 4-year degree, but we've got to start valuing work in this country. And so I think we can start to do a smart growth process for how we tackle debt and our deficit in this country. And I'll tell you what, it doesn't start with major zero taxes for the wealthiest corporations. It starts with tax fairness, where everyone's paying their fair share.
And thank you for that response. This goes into economics as well, but it has to do with the automotive industry. This is a question that we got from our Facebook Live. How do you balance automotive manufacturing and supplier concerns with environmental concerns? And how do you encourage the economy to save our planet at the same time?
Yeah. And that's the question that I wish we could share the answer with to the world, because in Michigan, we are a great example of this. We have been a region of intense advanced manufacturing, traditional manufacturing. We saw the legendary John Dingell champion the Clean Air Act, just as he stayed very close to our auto workers and our auto industry. And we can have both. And we can continue to put forward clean manufacturing and LEED certified buildings, something that I got to work on in the Obama administration. And this was from his Recovery Act efforts. We gave tax credits to companies, and it wasn't just companies, it was manufacturers who were willing to rehab their buildings to be more energy efficient. And this thing was so overprescribed, this part of the tax code that was under the Recovery Act. We thought we were going to be able to go in for another round, and then the leadership in the Congress changed. And so in some ways, right, I've taken a very cohesive approach as a member of Congress to solving some of our larger challenges as it pertains to environmental sustainability, and where I love to geek out with our manufacturing sector. Case in point, I've done this with plastics. I got to Congress and I thought, you know what, we've got a plastics crisis in our oceans and recycling that's not been able to keep up with what we've been used to outsourcing to China. We've been way too over dependent on China. And what changed when we entered into our trade war with China? Well, they stopped taking a lot of our recycled goods. And so our municipalities were saying, we're saddled with this, these recycled goods that are really costly to recycle. And we've also got consumer behaviors and patterns. And I just saw this as major supply chain opportunity. And so in my role on the House Science Committee as a subcommittee chair for research and technology, I held the first recycling technology hearing in 10 years, which was amazing. And it was incredible to see all 4 of our witnesses from industry, research, and municipality all saying the same thing. It's around one of my favorite things, standards. So they said, we need standards, we need the labeling, and then we need to recapture. And so what I did is I created the first ever House Plastic Solutions Task Force, bipartisan, worked all year. This was last year. I got all the industry partners to the table because I said, I'm not going to pillory you, because you're working with the World Wildlife Foundation. You don't want to see, in these nonprofits and the municipalities, you don't want to see a plastic crisis in our country, and you want to see it reused. And we want to have a collaborative 21st century conversation about how to get in front of this problem. And so I got all the stakeholders at the table. And then, of course, this year has been slightly different, but I introduced bipartisan legislation. And I don't know what's cooler, or more of a triumph rather, which is I did it with a Republican from Ohio, who's also a former OSU player, football player. So I don't know if it's Democrat working with Republican or Michigan or working with Ohioan, but we've got this really beautiful piece of legislation here on the research and development opportunities, the supply chain opportunities, working with the EPA. And so this is something, this beautiful question. I want to thank the Facebook viewer for asking it, because how do we bring the auto industry together with the environmental? It's about forming unlikely alliances, new approaches to dialoguing, and not pillaring one another. We can't be governing on these extremes. We've got to find 21st century built environment solutions to these problems. And this is an example of something I've done on plastics, and I'm still going on it because I got to get this bill passed. And then I've got a couple other cool companies here in Michigan. I mean, they're doing amazing things with this rehabbing process. And I think we're going to get some grants in here. So on and on and on. And that's just one example. And all of our auto companies are saying, the suppliers, they go, we use this plastic we want to reuse. And this is another way in which we can be sustainable. And then lastly, you see automotive, because our Congress has not been acting on the broader climate change considerations. They're setting the environmental goals, which, and saying, oh, well, we're going to move to all electric and this and that. And that's interesting, but we do need the government to come in, and they're looking for this, right? We've got to set the table here. We've got to set the, plow the field, set the table, get everyone on the same page and watch it flourish here. And I'm going to tell you guys, everyone's going to be coming to Michigan to watch what we're going to be doing on electric vehicles. Sky's the limit here.
Well, thank you for that response. Now, I'm going to switch it from economics. As you notice that some of the brothers on the screen are wearing a shirt that we put together to get out to vote. And I just show mine real quick. It said Black Votes Matter. And it has our logo on it. And it talks about voteless people as a hopeless people. So leading into that, we are very engaged in our community, specifically the African-American community, because that's our passion. So that being said, Black Americans overwhelmingly vote for Democratic. So my question is, what are the reasons that Black voters should vote for you? Because a lot of feedback, and this is real talk, is some African Americans feel that our vote is not really, it's kind of taken for granted. So I just like for you to give us some feedback on that. What's your take? Well, but you being just the same, you being here is already saying something. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, can I get one of the shirts at least, because those shirts are amazing, and that is such a message. That is such a message. So Ramon, I'm going to follow up with you on that, because, and maybe even, we could walk around together with that, because that's just very, very significant, I think, a part of it. Look, as you guys have all been hearing, oh yeah, there's the shirt. There we go. It's right up on the screen. That's great. As you all have been hearing, my focus is on the economy, and I measure the strength of our economy by how well the middle class is doing, and how well people who are, or how people who are looking for a job or looking for, that next opportunity have access to the skills training to help them land that job. And it can also be from a very young age. And I also mentioned my work with President Obama, yeah, that's another one. That's the woman's shirt. Okay, now, I'm going to get in trouble with some of my colleagues, because some of them are the other sorority. So that's Alpha's colors, but on to the question that you're asking, is that having worked in this really unique role under President Obama's administration on the U.S. Auto Rescue and for the President's Senior Counselor for Manufacturing Policy, I know what it takes to get our economy back on track. And as a member of the House of Representatives in the Democratic caucus, working very closely and being mentored by several members from the Congressional Black Caucus, their slogan, their mantra, their cause is engagement, equity, and economic empowerment. And that is what we have to push for. That is what I am working on pushing for in Congress, for our environment, for our healthcare, for education, and obviously for our overall economic success. And in previous jobs, when I was working in an advanced manufacturing research lab and responsible for workforce training and manufacturing engagement strategies, it was very important to me to have really the only diversity inclusion day that was happening in our manufacturing research labs around the country, because I was in the IoT space. And we're looking at this as a multi-trillion-dollar sector to our economy and to manufacturing writ large. But when we say that we've got an economic opportunity, it has got to be an opportunity for everyone. And we've got to be inclusive. And so I say this as that, I think, is what is speaking to the heart of what the Democratic base is. What we are doing in the Congress right now, what our majority is standing up for, it's the party of the people. And I don't take for granted anything, when I'm running for office. Look, I'm a Democrat representing a traditionally Republican district. Michigan's 11th district has the first full-term Democrat representing in the House of Representatives since before the moon landing. That's what so I had to go to people of different political persuasions. And the mantra has got to be, if my CBC has got engagement, equity, and economic empowerment, your Congresswoman has listening, learning, and leading in that order. And that is how I've conducted myself in this role. And that is what I'm pushing for in this campaign, and obviously the way in which we'll do things in this second term as well. And frankly, that's how you get the votes. If you don't understand why someone's voting a different way, or is undecided, you're not on the right trajectory there. You got to have an understanding of where everyone is and be able to get it. Now, I'm going to make my case to you, and I'm going to ask for your vote, and that's what I'm doing here tonight. Everybody on this amazing Zoom with Alpha Phi Alpha, one of the best fraternities in the let's just go, it's the best fraternity in the United States of America. Your Congress friend, Haley Stevens, is sincerely asking for all your votes this evening. So thank you so much.
Thank you for that. I almost feel like I can end it, but I got so many more things, because you have a lot of energy and a lot of great feedback. There's a saying that tide rises all boats. And there's a lot of policies that people push out. You hear policies saying, well, we've done a lot for African Americans, but it's really not specific to African Americans. It's a policy that's a tide that rises all boats. So I want to go in and I want to ask you this question, because this is a little bit more specific. Do you believe institutional racism exists? And if so, what policies would you support or introduce to address them?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, institutional racism does exist. And one of the things that I have found so empowering and beautiful in my first term in Congress has been working alongside strong Black leaders. I have been employed by an African American before. I serve on 2 committees that are run by members from the CBC. Eddie Bernice Johnson is the first woman. She's the first person of color to chair the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. You better believe that committee is doing some important and remarkable things. And the Education and Labor Committee, which is chaired by Bobby Scott. And that's my experience, right? That's my work experience. But then when I get out of the bubble and you start looking at our indicators, the statistics are alarming and they're not right. And it's going to take all of us to work on it. And I'm talking about entrepreneurship. I'm talking about that economic empowerment. You can look at, this question of, does institutional racism exist in this country as measured by what? 1 in 10 Black men being incarcerated in this country. The wealth of Black households versus every other demographic, looking at our own experience as Michiganders, as Metro Detroiters, and what took place in neighborhoods where in Detroit, where we were seeing Black entrepreneurship and Black business growth getting a highway blown right through them. The 1960s are over, but some of the practices that continue to qualify as institutional racism are things that we have got to tackle. Let's look at the last 30 years. Rodney King was 30 years ago. We witnessed in May the murder of George Floyd, to the shock and horror of this nation. And there's some who I serve with in the Congress who say, we don't need to do anything. We don't need to pass a law. We don't need to change anything. We don't need reform. And we need reform. And the bill that the House passed, which was named after George Floyd, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill, is a great piece of legislation that is doing bipartisan efforts, right? It's all drawn down from bipartisan efforts to, one, address this inflection point that we're at with race relations in this country, investing in standards and training in our police department, banning chokeholds and no-knock entries, requiring the body cams and making it easier for families to file questions or complaints. You look at some of the progress we've achieved and some of the work that we still need to do. And that's one matter. I think we got to get really serious about endowments. I think we've got to get serious about the way in which we are conversing and the way in which we are empowering individuals on corporate boards to select leadership for their companies to be people of color. It's just got to be the fact. And I think we've got a lot of work to do. I think that we've got to be finding ways to come together. And I also think we got to put our money where our mouth is and also where our voting card is. And I'm not just talking about all of you who need to get out the vote. I'm talking about where your legislators are actually casting votes. I'm voting for things that my predecessor and probably my opponent would not be voting for. And that is one step towards ending some of this institutionalized racism. And it starts with training. And it's got to start at an early age. We've also got to look at equities. Why is it if you live in one zip code, the health outcomes are different? And why are health outcomes different across different, we can look at the impacts of COVID-19 on the African-American community. And so this is part of why I ran for Congress. It's part of the work that I'm doing in Congress. And frankly, it's why I'm very grateful to have this question tonight and some of the time with all of you, because it doesn't just stop with tonight. It doesn't just stop with tonight. And just lastly, I think we're going to see some laws, not just passed through the House, but laws signed laws that will also help us chip away at some of these matters of institutional racism. The reforms that we want to see in criminal justice, as well as reforms around our prison culture as well.
You mentioned education, which we know education is and awareness helps address some of the levers in institutional racism. But when we talk about levers, there currently was an executive order signed by the current administration to remove some of those levers, which is to take away diversity training in the federal sector. And specifically when I read over that executive order, some of the things that they want to remove is white privilege, words like institutional racism. What is your thoughts about how we are supposed to address that when there's an executive order barring companies from using historic terms and showing how institutional racism, like you were saying, 30 years ago, or even way beyond that, are now still being implemented today? Those, I just would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll say that the words of our elected officials deeply matter. It has been studied that the words that are used or not used, that condone, racism that condone hatred and bigotry from elected leaders lead to violent actions. And this is something that we are witnessing in this country. It is on the rise. The rise of domestic terrorism, the rise of bigotry and hatred, what we saw in the summer of 2017, horrifically taking place in Charlottesville, where there were innocent lives lost, and people marching for white supremacy. And it wasn't properly disavowed. And this isn't just by the President of the United States. And it's not just a mincing of words. It's, you've got to be able, you've got to use the words. You've got to be strong on the words as a leader. And you've also you've got to continue to support the resources and the tools that are at our disposal to have these conversations. So when you talk about removing the training programs, removing the language, and we've seen this with science, we saw it with climate change that was removed. I have a bill on this, the Scientific Integrity Act, to make sure that the political affairs aren't meddling with scientific research. And we've got to have a bill on the standards and the training. And if we remove that, I deeply fear for not just the words that stoke hatred and bigotry, but the words that aren't there to stand up to it. The words are actions. The words are the force of our society and our culture and where we're going to go. And I know people who have directly benefited from those trainings. I have been part of equity and inclusion programs and benefited tremendously. You've got to read everything you can. You've got to be an ally. And we need to have this across the board. And frankly, I think some of our industry leaders are finally leaning into it on a multitude of fronts. Because how many, right? How many Black senators have we had in this country? How many Black governors do we have? How many Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies do we have? And who is making those decisions? And how are they making those decisions? We must use and find the words to be empowering, and we must shut out the bias. The bias ekes up in little jokes, in little words. This is part of the training my staff goes through. You know, just, oh, it's just a joke. I'm just joking around. It's not a joke. It's not funny because it starts like that. You know, we got someone in the Oval Office who loves to joke around and look at how many people are hurt. Look at how many lives are lost. Oh, it was just a joke when I said we should inject ourselves with bleach. You know, we're in a shutdown and we got record unemployment and we, you know, 100,000 plus American lives lost to COVID-19. We're in a serious business here. And we're in a serious business when there's these training programs taken away. And I've been working already with Bobby Scott, our chairman, Bobby Scott, on this. This is going to be a major thing in our education and labor agenda. And you better believe, I think we're going to be having some real discussions about it as lawmakers in the new Congress.
Thank you. I have a question, and you're answering these questions so thoroughly. I know we're not going to probably get to all the questions, but I'm going to do the best I can to ask these pertinent questions. One of the questions, what is the role of community colleges in your program to eliminate the workforce gap?
Well, I'll just say we've got some incredible community colleges in Michigan's 11th district. And why I love them is because they're catching students in high school, when they graduate high school, or when they're, you know, at various points in their career, and they're looking for retraining, got incredible public-private partnerships in our community colleges where the employers are directly matching with the programs that are in play. And I'm talking anything from nursing to advanced manufacturing and robots to cybersecurity training programs as well. And one of the things that's been great about our community colleges, and we've seen this in Wayne County and in Oakland County, is the results. That there's an easy point of entry because the cost and affordability. There's a major focus on diversity, which I'm grateful to see. I know our school craft president Jeffries, who just recently retired, was someone early on that I sat down and collaborated with. And it's accessibility, right? So one of the other areas that we're working on with COVID-19 and even before it hit, and something that's been a background of mine, has been the online learning opportunities, because we know that there's a real education for a lot of fields that can be afforded through online. It meets people where they are. They're still investing a little bit, but not at a place where they're going to end up in exorbitant debt, and they're gaining skills. And so we're working on cybersecurity strategies for that whole field of workers that we're in high demand for in this region. And we're also looking to meet our learners where they're at. So I'm very, very optimistic about the role of community colleges. I've had one of my uncle was an administrator at a community college, so I grew up learning about their benefits, and want to see us continue to support the resources, which I've gotten done in the first term too. We got a couple of great things on cobots and other investments for advanced manufacturing that want to support our community colleges, the workforce training, as well as the employer needs. And we got more to do. You talked about the skills gap, Ramon, and the projections are eye-popping. All right, we've got a lot to do. And so the beauty is the co-location and starting at a young age so that we avoid the gaps. And we've got this with FIRST robotics teams that are happening at the high school level. Folks go in and they get additional certificates and training. They can start with their employer following from high school, which is amazing. They get their higher education paid for. I know companies that are doing this out of their own pocket. They're sending their workforce in, and it's competitive. I mean, we've got a multi-million dollar, multi-million projection of workforce shortages, and Michigan is out of the Midwest, is really helping to lead the way. And I've heard this from a variety of different stakeholders who have been very impressed by how we managed to bring all these different partners to the table. And it's not easy to do in a metro area. And from with the city of Detroit and the surrounding areas through Oakland County, Western Wayne, Washington, Macomb, we're really firing on all cylinders here.
Okay. This is speaking of one of the big things that on everybody's mind is their personal health. And Michigan has the highest fatality rates as it relates to COVID-19. What are your thoughts on how the administration handled or is handling the pandemic?
Yeah, many months into the COVID-19 pandemic being declared by the World Health Organization, we fell short very early on in terms of getting in front of this virus. It was clearly spreading in this country, and we should have had testing and tracing done much earlier. We should have had accessibility. We should have had awareness. And I also think that we should have had some more empathy and and true compassion for the way in which this virus has wrecked lives and families. We have COVID-19 orphans, and I just haven't even heard from this administration the true acknowledgement and condolences to Americans who have an incredible hole in their heart. And I'm very proud of the work that our Michigan administration, our governor and the lieutenant governor have put into place. One, to tackle some of the disparities, the health disparities in our state as it pertains to COVID-19, particularly with our hardest hit populations, which were maddeningly and very tragically in our Black population as well as our Hispanic population. I think that our state got in front of that very early on, and while we've been whacked with this virus, and there's not been a precedent for this century for how to tackle this. It was very disheartening to see aid repeatedly being threatened to be withheld because tweets weren't being sent in the right way by our leadership here in Michigan. The dysfunction, and it's about investment in public health strategies first and foremost, investment in public health strategies, and the part of the togetherness that all of us are achieving here tonight. And I'm on this Zoom. I got some presidents and past presidents of Alpha Phi Alpha who are on, but I know so many of you are also tuning in over Facebook Live. And part of the cohort that we are forming here tonight is also about a path forward, about how to get out of this pandemic, about how to never go back. And also, and look, Ramon, I could sit here and criticize every single day. I would say some of the little silver linings were our COVID relief packages. There were 3 that were passed very early on in the month of March that were all bipartisan, that were signed into law. There were tweaks and improvements, but now where we're hung up is around, this next phase around recovery and some of the sustained pain in terms of, economic losses, but also, we need further investment into testing and to tracing. And we need to be getting in front of these things. I mean, it has been shown that this administration was aware of how deadly this pandemic would be and created chaos and confusion. And they'll say, oh, we shut down the borders. Well, I remember, the foreign travel, but I remember people racing home who were abroad, racing home, and then coming home to 7 hours smashed in lines trying to get through customs, which were entirely reckless. And there wasn't a plan. And those pictures and those instances showed us that there wasn't. And so this has been one of the greatest failures that we have ever witnessed in the history of this nation out of our Oval Office. And I'm going to get political here for a minute. And I know we're having a political conversation, but there's a man named Joe Biden and there's a woman named Kamala Harris, and they are 2 exceptional leaders who are going to get us out of this. Joe Biden is a healer. He is a doer. He led Obama's recovery. Heck, he was the one that President Obama sent up to the Capitol Hill to get everyone all straight and narrow when they were threatening to default on our debt over some political squirms. So we've got a plan here, and that is Joe Biden's plan around public health, around defeating this virus, and supporting every American through good public health guidelines.
Okay, based on the time, we have time for hopefully 3 more questions. And I know these questions are burning in the minds of our viewers and on Facebook Live and Zoom. One of the things that keeps coming up, and many people think that the wrong terminology is being used. So we want to know how you feel about defunding the police, but most people feel there's really police reform. And because some people are misunderstanding, thinking defunding police mean that you're gonna close down police departments. And so can you tell us what your thoughts are on that? And I really want to get to these other 2 burning questions. Go ahead, Congresswoman.
It's a misused term. It's just a wholly misused term. I find it ridiculous. Okay, I'm going to tell you something. I've been endorsed by the Michigan Police Officers Organization and Association, and very honored to have that endorsement, because these are, hardworking individuals who, have been stripped of their pensions. I got 25 communities in my district. I'm going to tell you something. Last year, how's it going? What's going on in the municipality? What do you need? What are your hot button issues? I mentioned the recycling issues that were saddling us with undue costs. There's infrastructure burdens, but on personnel, on hiring people into your municipality for public works jobs, but also police jobs, we run shortages. And I formed a coalition with my mayors and municipal leaders here in Michigan's 11th district. Some of them are former law enforcement, some of them are current law enforcement, and I will tell you, they have said first and foremost, you start saying things like, I just look. You can't mince words here, and that's what I think is happening. You mentioned reform, and this is what I've heard from the folks in the district. And I'm not just talking my mayors and municipal leaders, I'm also talking about actual people. Now, it should not be polarizing to say that Black votes matter, that Black lives matter, because of what we've witnessed in this country. That doesn't need to be a polarizing thing. This is something that it's that we can rally around and achieve equity on. In terms of our police departments, when we look at the reforms as I listed out with the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill, modernizing our forces, investing in the training, as we talked about. Why would we be diversity training, racial inclusive training, the comments that can get made, bias training, very, very important. And also though, the practices. And so we've got to look at the chokeholds, banning the chokeholds and body cams, requirements, as well as getting rid of these no-knock entries that create a lot of different problems. And we need justice. And my guys in our district, they have told me, they said, this is some place that we've really got to go, and we're going to continue to work on that. But I think when we start saying, this, when we start saying something that like maybe it just gets very confused. And I think we've got to stick with reform. I think, again, we've got to bring folks to the table together, the alliances. And this is what I'm working on every single day. This is the role of members of Congress, is they, in non-pandemic times, we're having the in-person town halls and the conversations. We're asking the tough questions, but saying defund the police is just very confusing of the matter, and I frankly don't think that's what we should be saying. And I've been pretty clear on that, and I'm happy to be clear on that here. Reform, justice and policing, the investments in the standards and the training. I'm going to tell you, I represent Troy. They have done this. They've got good community policing. They have been serving as the best practice. Other PDs want to start getting that and looking more like this. So they're sharing that publicly, and we've been finding a way to work together on that.
So the last question, and then I'm going to close it out. And I apologize again to everybody. There's a lot of questions, and some of your answers, because you spoke on Black Lives Matter, that was one of the questions that we had. But you talk about that they, in this last question, you kind of answered some things around it. I don't know if you want to expand on Black Lives Matter before I ask the last question, but that was, I think that was a good response. Do you have anything else you want to say around Black Lives Matter?
Well, this is another aside to what we were also just talking about is, guys, this is why I'm on, and I'm endorsed. I'm a what's called a gun sense candidate, and I'm endorsed by Moms Demand Action. I mean, we have got to change. These are public safety laws. We've just gotta make our community safer, and this is something we've seen, and this is why we're saying ban the chokeholds and these no-knock entries, because it's like, why are we so quick to draw a gun? And with the violence that gets ensued, and this is something really, really unique to our country. But I will say this. We are saying Black Lives Matter because we are in a place of disparity and we are trying to achieve equity. And we would not be saying this if we didn't have work to do, if we didn't have a murdered George Floyd or an Tatiana Jackson or Trayvon Martin. I have a distinct memory of where I was when I learned about Trayvon Martin's murder. And have we gotten justice? No, we haven't gotten justice. So until we get justice, we will continue to say Black Lives Matter, and I will continue to vote for the change that we want to achieve and need to achieve to have a better criminal justice system and more equity in this great nation of ours. And I will tell you, Brenda Lawrence is a mentor of mine in the United States Congress, and we've had a lot of long conversations about this, and a lot of long conversations about how tiring it can be, how long the road can be, and they're all inextricable. I mean, think of Martin Luther King's vision, of civil rights and silver rights, that economic empowerment, and that is why we still have work to do. And I'm looking out here too at this group, and you're also all leaders and a part of this as well. So the fact that we're dedicating the time this evening and evenings to come is going to continue to position us for achieving results and making change.
Okay, our last question, and this really is a good segue because you talked about justice. And just for your awareness, this, if you didn't know, Brother Martin Luther King and Brother Thurgood Marshall was a member of this great fraternity. And so that goes into our last question. What are your thoughts on the current nomination and the process for the Supreme Court Justice? Do you think that it should wait, or should it be pushed through like it's being pushed through right now?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to say this. The tradition and the history is to wait till after the election. Okay. I mean, the other side of the aisle knows this. The folks in the Senate pushing this through know this. It's sort of a break of tradition, and it's fine. They're exercising their legislative right to do it, but what would really be right is just to wait to after the election. And part of why I disagree with the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court seat is because of her positions on healthcare. And I'm going to tell you, there's lawsuit after lawsuit on this Affordable Care Act, sometimes known as Obamacare. And I don't know if that had anything to do with it, that it was done under President Obama's administration, because it seems like everything he did, this administration is just trying to erase, which I think has been exhausting and dysfunctional for our country. But what we see with her stance on protecting the Affordable Care Act will just damage the lives of so many Americans and their access to affordable coverage. We've heard it a lot. Maybe you're just plugging into this argument. Maybe you've been a part of it for a long time. But in Michigan, when we got the ACA passed and signed into law, we did a Medicaid expansion. We halved our uninsured rate, which was absolutely tremendous. We finally had protections for people with pre-existing conditions, which previously, oh, well, you got something going on. Well, I'm sorry, because this healthcare is too expensive. We need to be lowering the cost of prescription drugs. We need to be focused on getting rid of these junk insurance plans that don't cover you even if you break a finger or something like that. And so I'm deeply concerned about her nomination, and I wish we would have followed the traditions. I don't think that this confirmation is a given. I think it's really being rushed. Supreme Court's a lifetime appointment. And frankly, it's, it's a lot of things that we all count on that is on the line here. And, it's being rushed, and it's being done while the American people are currently voting.
Well, thank you for that response, and thank you for the time, Congresswoman Stevens, for taking the time to speak to Alpha Phi Alpha's membership and the viewers and people that want to learn more about you and the voting process. Regardless of the outcome of this election, we would like to remain in contact with you. In addition, if this election provides a favorable outcome for you, we would like to work with you to help address some of those issues that were brought up and you provided solutions for. But as there's solutions, but that takes active people to really get engaged, to getting the word out, to execute those solutions. So we would like to be in the forefront with you, in collaboration with you on doing that.
Yeah, well, I'd be honored to do that, Ramon. I think that's absolutely the way to get some great results for us. I think there's a lot still that I want to learn from all of you. I've been learning a lot tonight about this incredible fraternity, the home of Thurgood Marshall and Martin Luther King Jr. And now we got torch carriers of progress. And I couldn't have thought of a better way to spend this evening. So thank you for giving me some time to make a case. I'll tell you, I'm very passionate about these topics and very, very much looking forward to working with all of you.
And thank you again. And also, I would like to thank the viewers for taking the time out of their Monday evening to sit down in this Zoom meeting, considering that I think some people could be going to Zoom overload nowadays, because I think I suffer from it as well. But thank you for taking the time out to attend this forum. Just before I close out, 30 seconds or less, I would like to give our current presidents that helped, that collaborate and put this together, to say some closing remarks. And I'm going to start with President Brother Crowder, and then I'm going to go to President Jerome Vassar. So go ahead, President Crowder.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank Brother Vassar and Theta Zeta Lambda for inviting the Arbor Lambda to be a part of this webinar. As Brother Roberts mentioned, all chapters work hard to keep the communities under our area of influence informed on the importance of voting. For instance, we partner with our college brothers to host voters registration drive. We ride bikes throughout the city, passing out literature on voting. We have discussions at local salons and barbershops about the issues affecting our communities. And as of today, as you see right now, we're hosting Zoom calls as well as webinars to give candidates an opportunity to discuss their platform. So on behalf of Arbor Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, thank you, Congresswoman Stevens, for taking the time out of your busy schedule to have an open discussion on the issues.
Thank you, President Crowder. President Jerome Vassar.
All right, Congresswoman Stevens, I would really like to let you know how appreciative we are that you joined us tonight. I can't speak for anyone else, but you won my vote tonight. I enjoyed your comments. I think everything's been well said. I would like to tell the voting, our voters people, the Hopeless People Committee, job well done. Ramon Crow, Brother Crow's been working on this for months. So you put a lot of heart and soul into his efforts. So much appreciated. And thanks again for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thank you, President Vassar. At this time, this will conclude tonight's event. And again, I apologize for any questions I was not able to present to the Congresswoman Stevens. But hopefully, depending on how this outcome goes, we can have another forum and we can start talking about solutions and have a discussion. So at this time, I hope everybody has a wonderful night. And any last words you want to say, Congresswoman Stevens?
Voting is hope. I love it. So let's get out to vote. And I'm looking forward to, post-election sit down and plans to come. And I'm geeked. I don't know. They let the Congresswoman in with the fraternity tonight.
And we're going to get you a shirt. We're going to get you one of these shirts. We're going to get you one of these shirts.
Yeah, thanks for your leadership, Ramon. You're great. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good night,
See you
everybody.
guys. Have a good rest of the day. Yeah.